Welcome to our Brown Bag seminar. Today, I have the pleasure to introduce Dr. Bram Govaerts. He will present a seminar entitled Maize for Mexico, Crop Country Initiatives Based on Transformational Scenario Building and Design Thinking. Dr. Bram Govaerts is currently the Global Director, Innovative Business Strategies for the International Maize and Wheat Improvement Center. From 2003 to 2007, Bram was research associate with the Catholic University Leuven in Belgium, working in Mexico, Ethiopia, India, and North Africa, which resulted in a PhD in conservation agriculture. He holds a master and a bachelor of science and bioscience engineering, specialization soil conservation in combination with tropical agriculture at the same university. Govaerts received the Development Cooperation Prize 2003 of the Belgian federal government. Bram Govaerts received the 2014 Norman Borlaug Award for Field Research and Application, endowed by the Rockefeller Foundation and awarded by the World Food Prize on October 2014 in Des Moines, Iowa, and received also from 2,500 Mexican farmer organization the 2018 Premio Tecnoagro for the development of sustainable agriculture systems. Thank you so much.
Good afternoon, everybody. The seminar will be in English, and first of all, thanks for being here. There was a strange proliferation of brown bag or seminars today, so I think we could spend today the whole. Tengo que aprenderlo. Sí. Ahí está. ¿Ya mejor? Bueno. Sí, ya. Okay, so first of all, thanks for being here. There were many seminars today, so this is one more. With this presentation, many of you requested what is all this Maize for Mexico about, so this presentation tries to present where we are with Maize for Mexico, but especially also the methodology behind so that it can be replicated for other initiatives. So that's why we called it the Crop Country Initiative, which is the best we could come up with today, which we mean we can have maize for Mexico, wheat for Mexico, beans for Mexico, or beans for Colombia, beans for Kenya. So the general name we gave it was Crop Country Initiative, which may not be the most sexy thing we found, but it's where we are today. First of all, I want to thank the team that has been developing and leading the task force on this. Xiomara was heavily involved, Mercedes in Colombia, Daniela, and many others for the many initiatives. So the content first, why a crop country initiative? Second, what was the methodology we used and how did we combine social innovative solutions? And the last one, the methodology that we extracted that hopefully can be replicated and with an example, and the example we chose was Maize for Mexico. So why a crop initiative? It's basically to develop, the initiative is basically to put and bring actors together and visualize a shared future. So what we found out is that if we were discussing maize in Mexico, we could not get to a strategic plan because many of the actors were actually in a very opposite position and we could not get the discussion beyond towards a strategic plan. So the idea is to visualize where we are today, to visualize where do we go if we don't change anything, and then to visualize can we do things different. So basically we took some of the experience that we found when I participated with some others here in CIMMYT in the Lloyd's scenario building exercise. And they put forward two basic principles, and they said the first principle is if we really want to have a system change in pro of our clients or our target population, which are the small vulnerable farmers, then probably those unfortunate vulnerable people need to become of economic interest. And in order to make them of economic interest, you have to visualize what that value is. But also another concept is when risk is material and information about that risk is available, then ignoring that risk legally becomes an action. So if you visualize where you're going and this is representing a risk, then that can represent a call to action. So you all have seen these kind of scenarios, which actually provoked a whole shift in the financial sector. So basically could replicate this process and fine-tuned to do something similar, but at a country level. So if you want to know more about elements or several of the elements that are behind the methodology, I cannot give all of that today. You can find it in this book, which is called Working Together to Change the Future, Transformative Scenario Planning. So it has several stages, but it basically comes down to how do you come to visualize different scenarios. And then the next step we took from that, which is not in the book, is how do you then go to a strategic planning exercise. So we combined transformational scenario building and design thinking towards a strategic plan. So if we then look at what happened with Maize for Mexico, so it has become a strategy that results in comprehensive planning and implementation of interventions that support food sovereignty and safeguard the cultural heritage of Mexican maize through resilient agri-food systems. So this is very important. When we started the Maize for Mexico process, actually the participatory process drove us very strong towards this element here. Should Mexico produce sufficient maize as compared to what it consumes? But very soon, a different current came up that said, well, it's not only about self-sufficiency, it's also about the cultural heritage. So today we have the self-sufficiency part and the Milpa Biodiversidad y Bienestar, translated as Milpa Biodiversity and Welfare, included in the same exercise, but as two strong components of the same. So basically, it's summarized as, can we increase production of maize while honoring the cultural heritage and values? In order to get there, like I said, we use three principles. One of design thinking. We also tried to be very lean. We didn't have a lot of resources to put like huge research team on this, so it needed to be a very well-selected, strong team that could actually draw in capabilities from multi-institutions and from across CIMMYT without drawing too much on the already very overloaded scientists. So we set up a specific task force that could draw in that attention. And at the same time, we want it to be agile. We needed to adjust constantly because you're trying to match different interests in the same process. What came out very strong is the process does require an innovation broker. You need an independent broker that is per se doesn't have an interest in the process for the crop, for the country. And in this case, CIMMYT played that role by saying we are this neutral space where we can bring people together and discuss. So we identified different steps in the process to make sure that, yes, it is a combination of top-down and bottom-up. So the different steps we identify is you first have to understand, then to observe, to define, to prototype, and to test. We translated that into, we need to do analysis and research. We need to do a sector consultation to understand, and then we validated what came out of that. In order to visualize for some of the other sectors what we were trying to do, we developed a business model canvas about when you want to set up these kind of initiatives, which are the different elements you require. And we did it based on a business model for the development of a crop country initiative. So all the different aspects are there, going from how do we set up the relations with different actors involved, how do we make a value proposition, et cetera, et cetera. So in the end, what do we have today? Today we have a public policy document as a result of the process. We have a final master document, which is a huge document that has all the information, but will never be presented as that to one audience. It is basically the master that is then targeted to the different audiences. We have the innovation broker that facilitates the initiative, which in this case is CIMMYT, but it can change later on. And the initiative becomes a strategy with defined objectives as part of a public policy and a national intervention plan. So today, this is going to be part of the process of the development of the intervention plan of Maize for Mexico with the new government. So what were the different steps we went through? We asked three key questions. Where are we now? Where are we heading? And how do we achieve a better outcome? So for where are we now, it was and it was a diagnostic effort in which we integrated all the databases available to the lowest deaggregated possible. So in this particular case, it was deaggregated all the data at the municipal level. That was as deep and detailed as we could go. So this took actually, for Mexico, it took 6 months to integrate all the databases that were sitting in multiple organizations, partly in CIMMYT, others in the FAO, others in SIAP, others in Colpos, Chapingo, so all those databases were brought together with support from socioeconomics program, including data on consumption, data on future production. Basically, we mapped out where are we today. Next step was with simple projections and scenarios, where are we heading if you don't do anything? Obviously, if where we are heading, if you don't do anything by 2030, you are happy with that result, the process stops. Then you don't have to invest more time. If you, by not doing anything, are ending up with the situation you like, finished. If you don't end up in the situation you like, then you go to the third question, which is how do we achieve a better outcome? And for that, we did a sector consultation and developed a shared vision, and we did a validation with multiple institutions. Okay, here we go. So, analysis and research, where are we now? So it was a socioeconomic, we analyzed the socioeconomic context and the sector for the specific crop. We projected the production and consumption through models to 2030. It was kind of a diagnosis and an identification of potential strategies that could be negative and positive changes. So climate change would be a negative change. I don't know, a new invention, a new innovation would be a positive change. Well, not necessarily, but could be a positive change. And we formed an expert panel. This is key. So we selected not from CIMMYT, but from Arturo Silva was a member, but not because he's in CIMMYT, but because he's an expert on seed systems, maize, etc. But we also had experts from other national institutes that could bring forward a part of a potential vision. The sector consultation, where are we heading, was through a scenario workshop. So in that workshop, we developed with several sector actors the scenarios for the future. How can we achieve a better outcome? It was a process, a consultation process with interviews on with high-level representatives of diverse institutions and organizations, including the Minister of Agriculture, Vice Minister, the representative of the biggest farmer organization, the rector, the Chapingo, anyway, key level decision makers. Then how do we transform proposed solutions into strategies? So we did a definition of strategies that could provoke this change, and then we went into a strategic planning exercise where everything was mapped out logically. So this basically coincides, as you can see, with this section here, with this section here, and with that section there. So step number one, the analysis and research. Where are we today? So basically the questions asked are the one here. What are the opportunities? Is there new, when you want to do this exercise, before you start the crop country methodology in a country, it is very important to identify where we are and if there is an opportunity actually to propose this kind of process. In this case, there was an opportunity because one, the Mexican government was doing their agricultural planning, and two, they were preparing for a government transition or a presidential campaign. So there was a space where people were looking for understanding where we are today to propose a better or a different future. Be it because the government was trying to make a plan, be it because presidential candidates were trying to make a proposal for agriculture. So you have to find some space where this is a relevant exercise so that it's contributing towards something. Same thing we saw in Colombia, where there was recently presidential change. That same drive was there. So this can either be a big actor is looking for a new plan, or the country is making a shift. If you don't have that opportunity, it's going to be difficult to hook into something. You know? And to do the crop sector analysis, you need to identify, if you want to replicate it, where are the data, who owns the data, who works with the data, and is there analytical capability to develop the scenarios with some actors. Here in Mexico, a lot was done by CIMMYT, socioeconomics program, by CIDE, which is a university. In Colombia, CIAT was key to be involved as they hold many of the data on maize and bean production in Colombia. So what came out is summarized here. So maize in Mexico, is it important? Because also if it's a crop that is not important, why would we work on it? Yes, it's important, 30% of protein, 40% of caloric content comes from maize in the Mexican diet. So it is important because it's in many hectares, 8.5 million hectares it's cultivated. Also because we have a main center for technological development and genetic improvement in Mexico, which is CIMMYT. At the same time, it is the first country for human consumption of maize, but it's also the second country in the world that imports with volume of importation of the same maize. And you have this aspect here, the culture and the tradition, and it's the center of origin for maize. So that needed to be taken into account. So then when we mapped where we are today, basically on this side, there's a demand for white maize, and there's demand for yellow maize. And basically, it's used for human consumption. If you look at the total amount of maize, 48%. Animal consumption, 39%. And then some other uses, which can be industrial, which can be, etc. If you look at production, on average, we have 3.5 tons per hectare, but be careful that it's split out in 2.3 tons per hectare in the rain-fed areas and 8 tons per hectare in the irrigated, and you make an average, and you need to be careful always with the data. No? And the production Mexico makes is 21.2 million tons of white maize. So depending on the year, actually, the 2018 data looks that Mexico is going to export 1 million tons of white maize. So there has been increase in yield for white maize. And it's very deficient in yellow maize. So when we took all this at the municipal level, okay, it's not here. We will get there. And we projected towards the future, then you could see for the demand, basically white maize will stay stable because of changes in diet. So population does grow, but there is changes in diet. There is different drivers that basically consumption of white maize stays more or less stable. The demand for yellow maize is the one that will be highly increasing because of the further development of the meat sector. If we look at production, if we don't change anything, basically white maize production can increase a little bit, yellow maize also, but the deficit between the two will increase. So demand will increase by 26%, production will increase by 15%, and there's a deficit left of 17.7 million tons. As you can see, strongly driven on a macro level, production of maize to fulfill the consumption of a country. We know that underlying, there's the other story of milpa, biodiversidad, and bienestar. So we developed, based on that, a couple of projections and scenarios. This is where we are today. This is what will happen if you don't do anything. This is what will happen if you want 75% of self-sufficiency. This is the amount of maize you have to produce. And if you want 100% of self-sufficiency, this is the amount you have to produce. And this is then mapped, it somehow fell off the slide, but with the average yield that you have to accomplish at level of the country. Same exercise we did at level of each municipality. I will show it in a moment. This was taken, and I can tell you now, this was taken as well to the current ministry, and they took it into account for their national plan of agriculture. And it was taken to the different presidential candidates. So candidate number 1, which was Jose Antonio Meade, he indicated he would opt for this scenario here, 75% of self-sufficiency, following the guidelines of the FAO, that it's important to do 75% of your self-sufficiency. The current president-elect chose this scenario here, 100% self-sufficiency. As you know, it's one of the agenda points of the new administration. The third candidate, which was Anaya, said, "Come back when I won, and then I will decide." He didn't win, so he didn't go back. And the fourth candidate never responded. So that was interesting to see, and we worked also with the teams to say, okay, why are you choosing those scenarios? And we brought that back to the expert panel, without saying from whom it was coming, just as an extra input towards the process. As I said, a panel expert was developed of 6 specialists from different institutions, and they proposed, and from different capabilities, public-private partnerships, value chain, agricultural markets, knowledge about biotechnology, climate change, etc., etc. And so they proposed several elements for future improvement. So actually, this is the map on a municipal level, as you can see. This is the greener, the higher level of production of maize currently, today. This is the status today. And this is what the projection would look like if you don't do anything. So what you basically can see is that it's around 10 municipios, I don't know how to say in English, but 10 municipalities that produce more than 50% of the volume of maize today. If you don't do anything, this is only going to get extremer. This means that, and you know, many of the public policies today, subsidies, etc., are going to those areas currently. Obviously, this has a maximum, no? And you leave out an area where you may have potential, but this is if you don't do anything, if you don't change anything, this is how the picture would look like. So like I said, we came up with these scenarios, and actually we made an extra one, which is what do you need if you want to export 10% of the grain. And you can see how big the challenge is. Then you would have to shift your average yield between irrigated and rain-fed to 3.8 here, to 4.6, 6.1, 6.7. Why do we do these simple calculations? You can say, obviously, this is too simple, right? But if you already have here that you need to go to 32 tons per hectare, you know it's a totally unrealistic scenario. So it's basically a benchmark to see where you're going. So as we know, this current administration chose this objective. So this is the one we worked on as the next step. So basically, what does that mean? We need to fulfill this gap of 17.8 million tons, either by producing more or by changing the demand. If everybody stops eating meat and there's no market for meat anymore outside Mexico, this bar is going to go down. So where are we? In my presentation, I showed you where we are now. I showed you where we are heading. So the next step is, how do we achieve a better outcome? In order to do that, we did a workshop where we built the scenarios for 2030. But very important was not so much the scenarios, but it was building the spirit of ownership and commitment of over 100 organizations that are participating, and reach a consensus to move forward. So from strong opposition, you can imagine there were people saying, no, we should not produce more because it's going to affect land, water, and others that say we should produce more because we want to sell more seed. I mean, there were opposite positions. But as soon as we put a dot on the horizon towards 2030, where basically those particular short-term interests were overcome, and we built the scenarios, then you get easier to a consensus. Because nobody will agree in a consensus by 2030 with all rivers contaminated or something like that. So it's easier if you move the target out of the immediate reach and you visualize the complete picture. So the workshop at different stages. First, there were keynote presentations to set the tone of different high-level experts. In this case, it was the Vice Minister of Agriculture and other key decision makers, to basically tell everybody that was there, yes, you can go out of the box. He was opening kind of the permission to think outside of the box. Then the expert panel presented from their view as well where we are today, where we are heading for the future if we don't do anything, and what they saw as potential solutions. And this had to do with market access, this has to do with better farm assistance, this had to do with Arturo presenting the use of new seed, new technology, etc., etc. Then we had discussions and roundtables where risks were identified for each of the proposed solutions. And the different scenarios were identified. And then the results were presented. Now, whomever wants to replicate this, all the information is now systematized on how you can do the workshop. So we have the formats, we have the way you can build a scenario. So the formats are there, it's just a matter of changing the name into Colombia if you do Maize for Colombia. I mean, the whole material is developed. I'm not going to show it here in detail. It's all in English now, so it can be used to replicate what we did and can be fine-tuned. And then the next step was, how do we move from that towards the strategic plan? And the strategic plan was decided that we were going to use one slide to say the current situation, another slide, one, maximum two, to develop the opportunity of the future that is there. And then 2 more slides, which would represent short, medium, and long-term actions to change and to have a better outcome in the future. So this was the objective of the last stage of this whole process. Once this was developed, we went back and validated based on several criteria with the actors involved. So summarizing, 5 experts involved from the relevant institutions, more than 10 meetings, more than 80 workshops organized, 16 high-level meetings with the minister, 15 feedback meetings, but very decentralized. And this whole process, where did we end up? We did end up with these 2 elements: self-sufficiency, 4 motors of change: adoption of improved seed, climate-smart production systems, supporting networks for innovation, and linking producers to markets. Responding to the self-sufficiency element that was identified. Today, we know we need to complement this with Milpa, biodiversity, and bienestar. So we're going through a similar process with the group where Carolina is participating. Help me, Carolina, Denise, Santiago. Several people are contributing so that we do a similar exercise here to come to a complementary strategy looking at a different section of the farmers, and I will get to that. Here an example of the institution that participated. So it was all the way from NGOs like the Nature Conservancy, all the way to the World Bank, but also investment banks in agriculture, so it was the whole spectrum. Farmer organizations, CENEPAM, Consejo Nacional Agropecuario. So INIFAP was an important participant. The criteria to validate were 8 criteria, from social impact all the way down to political visibility. So you can have certain interventions that have a huge social impact, but a very low political visibility. So then you will have to do something to sell it to a politician or to a decision maker. Or you may have something that has very high political visibility, but very low social impact. Then that's probably not so desired, so you will have to do something to avoid your decision maker to go there. But also there may be things that are very costly, but have an immediate impact, or there may be things that are not so costly, but they take a long time to develop. So each of the actions identified was mapped against those 8 criteria. Out of the exercise also came a stratification of the different farmers that are in Mexico, and we identified you have commercial big farmers, you have small and medium farmers that have a potential to create excess volume and to go to market. And you have agricultura familiar and comunitario that are today looking at regional, local markets, but not the full national market. So like I said here, their income in commercial farmers, we want to increase them. Income here we also want to increase. Obviously also income for family farms we want to increase, but it may not be necessarily monetary, it could be better diet. Cost of production will be important to lower in the commercial farms heavily, to invest heavily in lowering costs of production because we know they're very inefficient. In intermediate farms it's important to do it, but it's not so important as in the commercial farms. And here probably in the family farming, it is more about which kind of resources do you want to invest. Maybe you need to make higher costs of production in money, but less in labor, or I don't know. It's a different intervention. Sustainability, very important, obviously, in each of the actions, but very strong to focus here. If today they are doing certain production in the mid-level, was an example from you, Gideon. Then we don't want to push them to using huge amount of water and draining the local lake. No? And obviously markets are very different. This is commercial grain on commercial markets. This is here we need to generate access to regional markets, and this is about local markets. But in the end, we want to increase the bienestar or the welfare or of the family that is there. So based on this, 3 levels of actions were developed: short-term, medium-term, and long-term for each of the motors of change that were identified. And this ended up in this simple table. Each motor, 3 actions, short, medium, long term, 3 actions. Under each of these, there are again 3 sub-actions. I will get to that. But also, indicators were developed where to reach, and the idea was to do it by 2030. Interestingly, and maybe not so surprising, although we were surprised, is nobody was willing to put indicators by 2030. They said it's too far, and we agreed when we made the scenarios that this was out of reach for us, and now you force me to put an indicator. This is a contradiction. So we put the indicators up to only from here to 6 years, by coincidence, up to 2020. What's it, 2024? Yeah. So clear indicators of the results that would be needed to obtain by 2024 to move it into that direction. Also, those were validated with the different actors in the system. So in the end, and I'm only going to show 2 motors to not bore you too much, and this is in Spanish, I'm sorry, but so in the end what we had was the adopción de semilla mejorada, or adoption of improved seed. Where are we today? Where is there a potential for improvement? And then on the medium term, what's the action? A1, on the short term, sorry, and the 3 or 4 sub-actions identified. Medium term, and the sub-actions. Long term, and the different activities under that section. Same for the next motor of change, sistemas productivos climáticamente inteligente, or smart production systems, climate smart production systems, sorry. So what is the situation today? Here Kai was instrumental to build some of the maps on heat stress, water stress, and what that could mean for the future. But also opportunities that are there to do mitigation and adaptation. Based on that, so basically, this is the problem. This is where you give the hope, and this is where you set it down into a roadmap. Medium, short, medium, long term. So we have that for each of the motors developed. So in the end, if you go to a decision maker, the only thing you show him is a booklet with the motors of change, short, medium, long term, the indicators to achieve, and some of the diagnostic. Also, the actors said we need a kind of a governing body. And this was changed also internally. This doesn't mean all those actions will be done by CIMMYT. This doesn't mean if you have a discussion with corpos that they need to be thinking about what they will be doing. There will be an element for everybody in the system because everybody has a function, but you don't have to worry about that when you're making the strategic plan. That will become clear later on. So basically, the stakeholders came up with this kind of governing body that they saw, where it was identified that CIMMYT Zagarpa could for a while lead the neutral space, and then the different strategies of intervention were mapped against different actors. As you can see, actually, here's a number 5. The number 5 was killed in the validation and was integrated in the 4th motor. So we did not yet go back to those guys here that fell off the table. No? So we need to see now how they move. Do they move in here, or what's going to happen? That step we didn't do yet. So where are we today? What do we have? We have a final master document and presentation, which is like a 120-slide documentation of the whole process that is used by the core team, so that all the information is in the same place. From that, a stakeholder master presentation was made, and a public policy presentation from the presentation side. At the same time, there is soon to come out the book that describes the whole process, and we'll have all the data, all the maps Gideon made, Laura, Siap, etc. will be in there, and a shorter booklet with the summary or the short summary. In parallel, and this is also important to make it happen, not only the whole planning process is important, the whole design process is important, but in parallel, a communication effort, an engagement effort, and a stakeholder management effort was done. Because if you don't do it, the whole thing is gonna be born dead before it's even finalized. So there were some press releases to incorporate and to give visibility to the workshops, there was a publication of an opinion piece about what does Maize means for Mexico. There was another one on Milpa, not necessarily driven by CIMMYT. The Milpa one was done by another institution. And there was some social media strategy with the different main institutions involved. Obviously, engagement is very important. So there was a dissemination of the initiative with key political actors and some alignment of strategies with different actors that participated. Why is this important? Several of the actors that participated, CNA, VIDA, Fundación Mexicana para el Desarrollo Rural, what they did when they were approached by the new government, we all used the same presentation. Tailored it to our particular view of the organization, but it started from the information when it was about Maize. It started from the same numbers, same diagnostic, same drivers of change, probably with some different sauce on it or with different view, because one is an NGO and the other one is a farm organization. But we started from the same material. And that became very strong because the message, the same elements came through different viewpoints. And obviously, you get gray hair, but it is important to do. You have to do stakeholder management. And stakeholder management also means if you have an expert from an institution, make him look good for his boss, which is the rector or the director of that institution. So it was constantly liaising with key actors of the agricultural sector and also constant share and receive feedback during the strategy and be ready to adjust and tweak and yet again and another version, etc. So where we are today with Maize for Mexico, after it started in 2016, June, or I don't remember, like the end of 2016. So for Mexico, it started around November 2016, and today where we are is this one here. We went through all the steps. For Milpa, Biodiversidad y Bienestar, we are around here, and we hope soon to move to this one here, which is the most important one, which is short-term, medium-term, long-term actions, sub-actions, indicators, and results. We replicated, we wanted to seek and this replicated, and we started the replication of this process in Colombia in June 2018. And we are today at this stage here where we are actually validating the motors of change and the sub-actions and identifying the results by 2026 for Colombia. So as you can see, it first took more than 2 years, if I'm not mistaken. The replication was done from June, and today this is where we are. Because the materials were there, because we could do some of the learning. Interesting in Colombia is already the initiative per se was presented to the Chamber of Agriculture, which is basically the Senate and the Congress together. All parties were there. The initiative was presented. The Vice Minister requested to have the information being brought into their development plan of the national plan for Colombia, of this new government. And all parties, independent of the color and the ideology, supported the initiative because saw how it was mapped together. And I can show you some similar documents as what you saw for the one for Mexico. That's it, what I wanted to share. So now, before taking some questions, I do want to thank for Maize for Mexico, Natalia, Arturo, Felix, Matthew, Kai, Nele, Andrea, Victor, Tanya, Casaya, Kevin, Gideon, Laura, Alberto Chazaña, and Marianne, who reviewed many of the documents and expressed strong hope that we will come to something similar with Denise, Santiago, Carolina, Marta, hub managers Eric, Jorge, Vladimir for the Milpa Biodiversidad and Bienestar, And in Colombia, another team also supported that. So additionally, Luis Narro and key people from CIAT supported the Maize for Colombia initiative, apart from the ones that were already involved in the one for Mexico. So open for questions and remarks.
Bram?
Sure.
Yeah, thanks for your presentation. One thing I'm kind of missing is the whole trade scenario. And of course, I understand, yeah, the incoming political president candidate has his priorities, but 100% self-sufficiency is a very costly scenario in terms of if you look at it from an economics perspective. Yeah, it ignores comparative advantage, it ignores trade policy in terms of any of the action scenarios that you present here. But all that aside, I mean, you also showed that the deficit is really in the yellow maize. How realistic do you see it that Mexico becomes self-sufficient in yellow maize, given where we are now?
Yeah. The last question I'm going to throw back to you. Hopefully we can get some scenarios to see how realistic that is given several of the drivers. You're absolutely right on the fact, I mean, actually, what was the response from this government is saying, yes, we want self-sufficiency, but self-sufficiency passes through 60%, 65%, 70%, 75%. So they themselves are aware that it's an aspiration, not necessarily a goal. So if you look at the indicators, there's not going to be self-sufficiency within 6 years, and probably never, no? Because as you say, it's too costly an intervention. Which was visualized through the exercise. And actually, market and trade is sitting here in this Ford motor. It's not that we took it out completely in that sense. I do agree we probably should make better scenarios on trade and trade influence and trade barriers, and absolutely. One of the things to learn is, for example, if you look at the scenarios for Colombia, they're way better on climate change impact than the ones for Mexico. Because there was capability in CIAT there was data there on those elements, and we didn't have those same exercises. Also, probably because, I mean, in Colombia, you're talking about 500,000 hectares, so, I mean, it's probably easier to do the modeling than doing it for 8.5 million hectares in Mexico with what jillion different agroecology. So, I mean, but I think what is important in the exercises is you can always do better, but at some point you also need to say, this is where I'm today, and then we have to do iterative rounds of improvements, and definitely that is a weak point that needs to be improved. Absolutely. Also important is any scenario is not a prediction of the future. So I mean, it's very difficult to predict, especially the future. So a scenario is a scenario. It's not a prediction of the future. It is to visualize and probably from there take step backs or take steps forward. But yeah, appreciate your comment. Carolina.
I don't need a microphone. Yeah. Thanks for the
presentation. Online, so that's why. Sorry.
Thanks for the presentation. It was very interesting. One of the things that have been characterized Mexico is that there's a lot of effort on planning, on trying to construct things for the future, like how to work. They even say that we are having plans, development plans, government plans since the 19th century, so we have a long tradition of planning, but also a long tradition of not implementing. So when it goes for implementing what we are agreeing, that goes out of the picture, no? So I'm wondering how this experience that as I understood, as you present, try to be inclusive, very participatory, and in a very governance structure can help to move from the very planning that we do, that we have great plans. If you see our law of road development, it's one of the best ones, but how it can help to change practices, because at the end, we have been living the experience of trying to implement programs as pro-agro and finding that it's in the field, in the regions where things are leaking.
I think two comments came back in that sense. It was not only, the comment was, yes, Mexico has a long tradition of making plans. And like you said, one comment was, but they may not be implemented. The other comment was, but not based on data, or not based on shared homogeneous data. So as soon as the plan comes out, somebody says, no, this should be 6.5 instead of 5, I don't know. So I think one element that was important is it was done with data from everybody, and everybody agreed on the use of the data, so that you can maybe not agree with the conclusion, or you can have a different view, but at least that core piece was used the data of everybody available. On the part of implementation, if you look at the strategic plan, it doesn't have really short, medium, long term, and it's not connecting to indicators. So I think there's some indicators, but they're usually quite, how should I say, open-ending, no? Making people happy, everybody agrees with that. So it's kind of, so I think that is a difference here too. I don't think we have to pretend to change necessarily I mean, I think it was a huge opportunity, the fact that there is a national development plan. So if this can be an element in the national development plan that is coming, that's already, I think, gonna make a change. If there would be no history of planning at all, it's a very different, would become a very different story. But I'm not sure if we're gonna succeed. I mean, I think it's also gonna come down now to translate this in, okay, what can CIMMYT do? What can Corpus do? What can Chapingo do? I mean, I'm not saying, this is still far from changing Mexico, no? And no pretension at all to be this the change Mexico requires. I mean, it's still many ifs are there. But sometimes, and sorry, also sometimes the process is more important, or is as important as what comes out of it. And the fact that already many institutions said, why are we actually going separately talking to the government? Why don't we go together with a similar shared view? Was already a big change. CENEPAM, CNA, that already changed the drive, so then already there's a first step where before we were taking 2 months to plan in Mexico to come to consensus. We can take that away and probably dedicate it a little bit more to putting it into actionable steps. No? So the government requested same process for wheat, beans, and rice.
Any other question?
Just going back to the slide, Bram, on how much more quickly you were able to implement Maize para Colombia than Maize for Mexico, what would you say was the biggest lesson learned from Maize for Mexico that really allowed you to do things the right way in Colombia?
I don't necessarily, and I would like to ask the team if they agree or not, and they may complement. From my point of view, it's not like one big lesson learned. It's rather that you can avoid some trial and error on the one hand. On the other hand, when we did Maize for Mexico, we were starting from reading methodologies and trying to turn those methodologies in something actionable in agriculture. There is not a lot of those methodologies actually apply to agriculture, so you cannot go and easily, I mean, so that was part of the time consumption on the one hand. I think a lot of time also went in how do we do the setup institutionally. So I think one big lesson learned was set up a very clear, small, high-performance team with the right capabilities. So not people that are all the same, but different capabilities, different characters, so that you have the movers, you have the thinkers, you have the screamers, you have the, so that it kind of can work together. And that's what I think we did more conscious in Colombia, saying this is going to be the team, and you are responsible for making this happen. That doesn't mean you don't have to work with the jillion of satellites around it, but it's very clear who is the core team responsible to make it happen. I don't know if Xiomara, anything you want to add? You agree, you disagree? Danny?
Yeah, I would also say that for the analysis, obviously we had a help from the socioeconomic program, but we decided to make it shorter, the analysis that we did in Colombia, because for us in Mexico, it took about a year to get all the information together and analyze the data. So that was like, we just need to put the data on, and CIMMYT was very helpful for that.
I think that was that's right. I think that was another one to say. You can either go for a long analysis and probably you come up with a difference of 16 million tons instead of 17.3. And this is probably not, but in the end, that's not a point. That's probably the point if you want to make a scientific paper. It's not a point in this kind of exercise. You want to do it as good as possible, but also what is very important is say what you did. So be very clear about this is the shortcomings of the projections we did. The ones in Colombia are strong on climate change, but they're weak on, they're not so down to municipal level. There was not a lot of data of consumption, so it has limitations. Mexico has other limitations. We did not include so much climate change drivers to predict the future, but it was a linear at municipal, it was a modeling at municipal level towards the future. So be clear about your shortcomings, because there's going to be always, but at some point move forward instead of staying and trying to be super precise for something that is trying to say something about the future you anyway don't know about. So yeah, it's a
Well, thank you for the nice presentation. I have a question based on what Olaf asked. We have a maize starting with 300 kilogram per hectare to maize reaching to the point of 18,000 kilograms per hectare. And so very diverse country with very diverse, from 0 kilogram of nutrient to 500 units of nutrients per hectare. So what is the different strategy we have for different types of maize in Mexico, which was not very clear for me?
Yeah, I think the very good comment, and yes, absolutely agree. Starting point is very different in very different areas, and I was probably not clear enough, but so this is the high-level typology, if you want to say it like this, of the different farm realities. Obviously, behind each of those, there's still hidden many sub-realities. And I think this is where, for example, here, the hubs in Santiago are going through an exercise to trying to map different typologies of milpa and self-sufficiency farmers. Is like, I mean, I know there was a whole discussion about what milpa means also in the team. So I mean, let's not trying to steer that discussion, but sub-typologies that you need to take into account. Also, if you look at the details of the drivers, not all of the actions and activities and sub are targeted to the same typology of farmer. There's some that need different elements. So that's this. Also, this kind of exercise does not take away that when you implement, you will have to do a targeted planning exercise and identify limiting factors and apply methodologies for that on that particular community. And then within that community, probably you have also differences, so on that particular plot. But in the end, you can lose try not to lose ourselves in complexity, but respect the complexity and be agile to adjust to it, I think was the road we took. Victor.
Yeah, again, thanks for the presentation. I understand this is a plan, right? So if we want to move from a plan to a strategy, then we need to have a methodology also for that strategy.
Yep.
How would you say in the case that Sagarpa requests or suggests CIMMYT to lead that strategy, how good would you say we are prepared to be the leading actor for this strategy, or we want to be more in the position of supporting to the Ministry of Agriculture, saying, okay, this is your thing. And if we do the strategy, if we participate in the strategy, we would need to also to develop a methodology, understanding how often do we need to get back to the sector to update references and so on, right?
Definitely, we would not be the lead for the overall Maize for Mexico strategy. I mean, and to be honest, I don't think anybody will be. The strength is the decentralized capabilities. I mean, there will be financial sector who will have to lead on the development of the right financial products as identified in the discussion. I do agree that Sagarpa, as a ministry that basically, I mean, has a lot of influence on the direction of the government, the direction of the country, sorry, will have an influence on a strong influence on where to go, and it will be very important to put the right information and data for their decision. But also, private sector can have a strong drive into a different direction, so it's also important to put on their table the right information for their decision making and taking. CIMMYT can play a role if we identify we have competitive advantages in several of the motors of change identified. And so, to be honest, number 4 will probably be a very different, which is mainly finance and market and trade oriented, will be a very different role for CIMMYT than improved seed for maize. If we do this for beans or for rice, probably you put the methodology and you can guide the development of the methodology. And as far as there may be maize-based systems or wheat-based systems that include rice, then we have probably a role to play, but it's going to be different for different systems. Also important, we do realize, and I didn't mention that, it says maize for Mexico, but it's about agri-food systems, so there are actually actions there that will have impact not on the maize, but on other crops or on other activities for farmers. No, probably I can imagine with the risk of going too fast, but that in Milpa, Biodiversidad, and Bienestar, there will several elements that will not have anything to do with maize production per se. So it's broader than, but just to be catchy, we called it Maize for Mexico, but it is maize agri-food systems for Mexico, which implies beans and many other capabilities.
Thank you so much, Doctor. You were saying that we have these initiatives, and what we're trying to do is to replicate those in different countries. Which one do you think are the main challenges these initiatives could face in other countries?
Okay. Yeah, thank you for the question. I do think the methodology indeed can be replicated, and it would be interesting, for example, to do a Maize for Kenya analysis. I think the main challenge is to identify in which space is there room for such an exercise. We identified a space in Colombia with government change. We identified one in Mexico with government change. What is that same space that maybe donor community making plans for Kenya? I don't know, I'm just inventing. So how do we select and identify the space where this can find oxygen or fertile ground or however you want to say. And sometimes you need to provoke that yourself. No? You need to create that enabling environment to be there and identify the opportunity. It's not that the government came to us and say, we have presidential candidates, maybe you should do Maize for Mexico. No, I mean, it's not the way it works. And when you put it on a presentation, everything makes sense and is very logic, but in reality, you need to make some turns. No? So that's one. The second challenge is get lost in multi-actor discussions and probably not have enough capability within ourselves as CIMMYT to abstract from what we can contribute and that we are doing something broader here than only looking at what we can do and for which we could get money. As you can see, money doesn't come in here. No? One phrase we used very regularly during the process was, don't worry about budget, there is no budget. So nothing to worry about. There's simply no budget. And that was in Colombia something we needed to get over because CIAT, Corpoica was immediately saying, and how much money is this going to give? So, ¿cuánto dinero me van a dar? Don't worry about the budget, there is no budget, so nothing to worry about. There will be budget in the future, but if you get lost in that, you don't get anywhere. I think we are over time, so unless there is another burning question. Any comments for improvement, always welcome. This is an exercise of trying and co-constructing. So if you have a wonderful idea to complement, please don't hesitate to come and contribute it. Thank you.